A gunshot cracked through the Nevada air. A thief was running with her last 18 coins, 3 days of scrubbing miners' grimy clothes. That's all she had to feed 5 children. At 19, Hannah Dawson never imagined she'd be the one putting food on the table. But 6 months ago, influenza came and took both her parents in a matter of days. Now it's just her, and 4 hungry siblings who look to her for everything. Then a stranger appeared. A cowboy who'd lost his own family, his mother, father, and 2 little sisters, to fever while he was away fighting a war. A man who came home to an empty house and 4 fresh graves. He's been wandering ever since, searching for something he couldn't name. Until he saw Hannah guiding her children to church, looking proud and fierce despite having nothing. And he made her an offer that would change everything. I'm not asking for your heart. I'm asking for a partnership. Stay until the end. Because what starts as survival becomes the deepest love either of them ever knew. The lesson. This story will remind you that there's a difference between managing and truly living. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help from someone who needs you just as much as you need them. If this story touched something inside you, drop a comment. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Hit like to share this message with someone who carries too much alone. Share with anyone who needs to hear that asking for help is strength, not weakness. And subscribe, because we believe the strongest families aren't always born, they're built, one act of courage at a time. That gunshot cracked through the clear Nevada air like a whip, sending Hannah Dawson's heart to pounding as she huddled behind an old rickety shed. She clutched a small pouch of coins she had just earned from 3 long days of scrubbing the miners' grimy clothes. It was 1876, and the town of Verde, Nevada had surely seen better times. The prosperity that the railroad brought through had started to fade, just like the evening sun painting long shadows across the dusty main street. "Stay down, you thieving rat," bellowed Sheriff Mills, his boots kicking up dust as he chased the scoundrel who had just tried to snatch Hannah's hard-won pay. Hannah held her breath until the footsteps faded. Then she stood up, smoothing her simple cotton dress and tucking the coin pouch deep into her pocket. Those few coins meant the world. Food for 5 hungry children, not even counting herself. Oh, 19. She never figured she would be the one putting food on the table for her 4 siblings, but life out west had a way of turning things upside down. Just 6 months back, the influenza came through and took both her mother and father in the span of a few days, leaving Hannah to be the head of the house. With 12-year-old Sarah, 10-year-old Michael, 8-year-old Lily, and little 5-year-old James all looking to her for everything, Hannah felt like she had aged years in just a few months. A deep voice called out from behind her. "Miss Dawson, are you all right? I saw that fella try to make off with your earnings." Hannah turned to see Ethan Blackett, his tall shape standing dark against the setting sun. The cowboy had shown up in Verde about 3 weeks ago, picking up odd jobs and turning the heads of nearly every single woman in town, and a few of the married ones, too. With his sun-browned skin, lean, strong build, and eyes as blue as a summer sky, there was no denying he was a handsome man, but Hannah had no time for such things. "I am fine, Mr. Blackett." Sheriff Mills ran him off before he could get a hold of anything. She pushed a stray piece of honey-brown hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of her rough, work-worn hands, and the dark circles she knew were under her eyes. Ethan took a step closer, the spurs on his boots jingling softly. "Let me walk you home. It is getting dark, and it seems this town is attracting some rough characters these days." Hannah paused for a moment. She had learned the hard way to be cautious of kindness, and the strings that usually came with it. "That is kind of you, but it is not necessary. I have made this walk 100 times." He smiled, and the corners of his eyes crinkled. "Well then, 101 will not hurt. Besides, I am heading that way anyhow to check on the Widow Parker's fence." They started walking without another word, passing by the saloon where loud laughter and piano music spilled out into the street with the yellow lamplight. Hannah walked a little faster, feeling antsy to get home to the children. She had left Sarah in charge of making dinner, and while that girl was more responsible than her years, Hannah never truly rested easy when she was away from them. "You are carrying a heavy load, Miss Dawson," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "The whole town is talking about how you have stepped up for your brothers and sisters." Hannah's back went stiff. "We are managing just fine." Ethan's voice was gentle. "I did not say you were not, but even the strongest person can use a little help now and again." They finally reached the small, weathered house on the edge of town. The paint was peeling bad, but the little yard was kept neat. From inside, they could hear the sound of children laughing. Then came the crash of something falling, followed by a loud cry. Hannah rushed to the door, but Ethan was quicker, clearing the 3 porch steps in a single long stride and pushing the door right open. Inside, little James sat on the floor with tears rolling down his cheeks, while flour covered nearly every surface in the room. Sarah was trying her best to clean up the mess, her face streaked with white. "I am so sorry, Hannah," Sarah's voice trembled. "He just wanted to help make the biscuits, and the flour sack tore open." Hannah knelt down by James, looking him over for any scrapes. "Are you hurt, little one?" The boy just shook his head, his crying softening as he pointed a finger at the ripped bag of flour. "I wanted to make biscuits like Pa used to." A pang of sadness hit Hannah's heart. Their father had truly made the finest biscuits in all of Nevada Territory, a recipe he had learned from his own mother back in Missouri. "It is all right. Accidents happen." She then remembered Ethan, who was standing there awkwardly in the doorway, holding his hat and taking in the whole scene. He was not just seeing the flour mess, but the mended curtains, the mismatched chairs, and the one oil lamp that cast long shadows on walls that had not seen a coat of paint in years. Pride and embarrassment fought inside her. "Mr. Blackett was just about to leave," she said, getting back on her feet. But Ethan did not budge. Instead, his eyes scanned the room, stopping for a moment on Michael and Lily, who had come out from the back room to see what all the noise was about. 4 pairs of eyes, all the same Dawson blue as Hannah's, just stared back at him. "How about I make those biscuits?" Ethan said all of a sudden. He set his hat on a hook by the door like he had been doing it his whole life. "You can make biscuits?" Michael asked, sounding doubtful. Ethan grinned wide. "Son, I have been cooking on cattle drive since I was not much older than you are now. My biscuits might not be as good as your pa's were, but I guarantee they will fill your belly." Before Hannah could even think to object, he had rolled up his sleeves and was looking over what little ingredients they had left. "You got any more flour tucked away, Miss Dawson? And maybe a little bit of lard?" Hannah felt a wave of annoyance, but it was mixed with something else she could not quite put a name on. "Mr. Blackett, I appreciate the offer, but really—" "Please, Hannah," Lily said, tugging on her skirt. "I am hungry and Sarah burned the beans." "I did not," Sarah shot back. "They're just a little extra crispy." Hannah let out a long sigh and walked to the small pantry where they kept their meager supplies. She gave Ethan the last bit of their flour and a small tin of lard. "Much obliged," he said, and he got right to work. He cleared a space on the table and found a mixing bowl with a surprising quickness. His big hands, calloused from holding reins and ropes, moved with a gentleness she did not expect as he mixed the ingredients. The children all gathered around, watching the stranger in their kitchen with wide eyes. Even Sarah, who acted as Hannah's second-in-command in everything, seemed fascinated by Ethan's easygoing way and the stories he told while he worked. So there I was, staring down this mean old longhorn that decided the chuck wagon was right in his path. The cook was yelling his head off, and all I had was my rope and my wits. "What did you do?" Michael asked, his eyes big as saucers. "Well, Ethan caught Hannah's warning look. I managed to coax him back to the herd without too much trouble. Sometimes the biggest problems just need a gentle hand." Hannah let out a soft snort as she wiped flour off James's face. She knew there was more to that story, but she was grateful he kept it simple for the children. When the biscuits came out of the oven, they were golden brown and smelled wonderful. Paired with the beans they could save and some preserved peaches Hannah had been keeping for Sunday, it turned into a feast. The children ate with more excitement than she had seen from them in weeks. "Mr. Blackett," Hannah said after they had all finished eating, "thank you for your help tonight. We are in your debt." Ethan just waved his hand. "No debt at all, just being a good neighbor." He stood up and reached for his hat. "But I was thinking, Miss Dawson." Hannah grew tense, waiting for him to make some kind of proposal or assumption. "I could use some help myself. I've been looking for somebody to do my washing and mending." He glanced over at the neat stitches on James's patched shirt. "I noticed you have a real talent with a needle." "I take in sewing and laundry," Hannah said carefully. "But I have set rates." Ethan's eyes twinkled. "I would not expect anything less. I thought maybe we could work something out. I need someone to look after my things, and from the looks of it, you all could use one less mouth to feed." Hannah just stared at him, completely confused. "I beg your pardon?" "She has 19 with 4 younger siblings to feed," Sarah spoke up, eager to show off her counting. "That makes 5, including Hannah." "Make that 5 siblings and I will help," Ethan said, his face turning serious. "I have been thinking it is time I settled down somewhere. Put down some roots. I have got my eye on the McGregor place. The old man is moving back east to live with his daughter. It has good grazing land and a solid house." Hannah felt the color drain from her face. "Mr. Blackett, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting—" "I am just suggesting a fair trade, Miss Dawson. You take care of my things, cook a meal now and then, and I will provide for all 6 of us." He looked over at the children who were listening to every word. "I have been on my own for too long. I reckon these youngsters could teach me a thing or two about what having a family is like." "You do not even know us," Hannah protested. "I know enough," Ethan replied. "I know you are proud, and you work harder than anyone. I know these kids are well behaved, no matter their situation. And I know I have the means to help, and that nobody ought to have to carry a burden that heavy all by themselves." Hannah's mind was racing. Was he asking her to marry him? Or was this just charity dressed up as a job? Either way, her pride bristled at the thought of depending on a man she hardly knew at all. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackett, but we are managing just fine on our own." Ethan's eyes moved around the small room, taking in the children's thin faces and their patched-up clothes, the carefully mended curtains and the single lamp burning low to save oil. "Of course you are," he said softly. "I never said you were not. But there is a difference between managing and living, Miss Dawson." He placed his hat on his head and walked toward the door. "You think on it. I will be around." After he was gone, Hannah just stood there, staring hard at the door. "Hannah," Sarah's voice cut right through her thoughts. "Are we going to have to live with Mr. Blackett?" "No," Hannah said, her voice full of grit. "We are staying right here in our own home." But later that night, as she tucked the little ones into bed in the one small room they all shared to keep warm, Hannah couldn't help but turn Ethan Blackett's offer over in her mind. It was not the nerve of it, though that still bothered her some, but how practical it was. Winter was creeping in, and any chance of work would dry up with the first snow. The roof had a leak that needed patching, and James had already grown clean out of his only pair of shoes. Pride is a luxury, her mama used to say, and luxuries were something the Dawsons had long since learned to do without. The next morning, Hannah was up before the sun, as she always was, to get the fire going and put the coffee on before she walked over to the Donovan house, where she worked 3 mornings a week cleaning and cooking for the banker and his wife who could not get out of bed. She gave Sarah her list of chores for the day, lessons for the younger children, bread that needed baking, and laundry to hang on the line, then stepped out into the biting autumn air. The sky was just starting to get some color, the stars fading away as the east lit up with the promise of a sunrise. Hannah had not walked more than a block when she felt more than heard someone walking in step right beside her. Her hand went straight to the little knife she always kept in her pocket, something a young woman walking by herself in the dark hours of the morning just had to have. "Morning, Miss Dawson," Ethan's voice said, and Hannah let her shoulders drop a bit, though she kept her hand right where it was, on that knife. "Mr. Blackett, you are up with the chickens?" "Never was much for sleeping past sunrise," he answered back. "Easy as you please." Heading to work, Hannah just nodded, not slowing her pace one bit. The Donovans. Mrs. Donovan needs help with her morning routine. They walked on for a minute without a word, the sound of frost crunching under their boots. "I have been thinking about your situation," Ethan finally said. "I might not have put it to you plain enough yesterday." Hannah cut her eyes at him. In the early light, his face looked strong, his jaw dark with stubble, and his eyes were fixed on the path up ahead. "You made yourself perfectly clear, Mr. Blackett. You are offering me charity, and in return I would provide domestic services." Ethan stopped walking then, and Hannah had to stop too, or she would have seemed rude. "No, ma'am. What I am offering is a partnership." He turned to face her straight on. "I have been drifting ever since the war ended, working cattle, taking whatever jobs I could find, and I have got a decent bit of money saved up, enough to buy that piece of land I told you about. But a ranch needs more than just one pair of hands, and a house needs someone who knows how to make it feel like a home. So you are looking for a housekeeper?" Hannah's voice was full of doubt. Ethan's mouth turned up in a little half-smile. "If that was all I wanted, I would just hire the widow Parker." "No, Miss Dawson. I am looking for something a little more permanent." Hannah felt her cheeks get hot as she understood what he was getting at. "Mr. Blackett, if you are proposing marriage to a woman you hardly even know—" "I am not proposing, not just yet." Ethan's voice was steady as a rock. "I am suggesting we consider it. Get to know one another, see if we might make a go of it." "I have responsibilities," Hannah said, pointing her head back toward her house. "4 very important responsibilities. That is exactly why I am suggesting this. Those children need a stable life, some security, a proper home with plenty of food and warm clothes." He took a breath. "They need a man around, too. Boys need someone to learn from, and girls need to be protected by." Hannah's back went up straight. "I have been protecting them just fine on my own. I never said you have not." Ethan's voice got softer. "But you are just one person, Miss Dawson. Even the strongest back needs some help carrying the load from time to time." The sky in the east was turning pink now, and the day was truly starting. Hannah knew she would be late if she did not get a move on. "I have to go," she said. "The Donovans will be expecting me." Ethan nodded and took a step back. "Just think on it. There is no rush, no pressure. I will be over at the McGregor place today, looking into the terms, if you decide you want to talk some more." Hannah hurried off, her mind all stirred up like a dust storm. The whole idea was plumb crazy, marrying a man she barely knew just for a roof over their heads. Still, it was not like it had never been done before. Plenty of marriages out west started as practical deals, and love sometimes grew out of them later on, if it grew at all. And there was something about Ethan Blackett that made her curious. It was not just his handsome face or his capable-looking hands, but the way he had spoken to each of her brothers and sisters the night before, treating them like they mattered instead of looking down on them. It was the way he had made biscuits without a single complaint, and told stories that got a laugh out of even her serious Sarah. The day went by in a rush of chores, scrubbing floors at the Donovans, then running over to Mrs. Hollister's to drop off some mending, then on to the general store where Mr. Peterson let her sweep the floors and stock shelves in exchange for credit. By the time she finally walked home, the sun was sitting low in the sky, and her back was aching from all the bending and lifting. She was surprised to find the house so quiet when she got there. Usually the children were fussing or playing, making enough noise to be heard all the way down the street. Worried, Hannah rushed inside, only to stop dead in her tracks at what she saw. The kitchen table was set with their old, mismatched plates and cups, but a delicious smell was filling the little room. Sarah stood at the stove, carefully stirring something in their biggest pot, while Lily was arranging some wildflowers in an old jar. Michael and James were not anywhere to be seen. Sarah, what in the world is going on? Where are the boys? Sarah turned around, her face lit up with excitement. Mr. Blackett brought us a rabbit. He showed Michael how to skin it, and now they are in there washing up. He said every man ought to know how to put meat on his family's table. Hannah set down her basket of mending. A funny, uneasy feeling started to settle in her stomach. Mr. Blackett was here all day long. Not all day, Sarah said, going back to her stirring. He just came by after lunch to see if we needed anything. James told him we had not had any meat in a long, long time, so Mr. Blackett said he would be right back. And then he came back with the rabbit and showed us how to make a stew. The door opened behind Hannah, and she turned to see Michael and James walking in, with Ethan right behind them. All three of them had damp hair and clean faces, though Ethan's shirt had some suspicious stains on it that looked a whole lot like blood. "Evening, Miss Dawson," Ethan said as he took off his hat. "I hope you do not mind me dropping in. I figured the young ones might enjoy some fresh meat." Hannah was caught between feeling grateful and feeling irritated. That rabbit stew smelled absolutely wonderful, and she could not even remember the last time they had eaten anything better than salt pork or the rare chicken. But Ethan, just assuming he could come into her home while she was gone, taking her brothers off without so much as an ask. It was amazing, Hannah. Michael's eyes were shining with excitement. "Mr. Blackett showed me how to use a skinning knife and how to tell which parts you keep and which ones you throw away. He says I have got a steady hand. And he let me help too," James added. "I got to pull the tail off." Hannah shot Ethan a look that promised they would be having a serious talk later, but she just could not bring herself to spoil the boys' excitement. "That is wonderful. I'm glad you both had a chance to learn something new." "The stew is ready," Sarah announced. "Mr. Blackett said we should wait for you to get home before we started eating." "Very considerate," Hannah said, her voice a bit dry. "Mr. Blackett, could I have a word with you outside?" Ethan nodded, his face carefully blank as he followed her out onto the porch. The evening air was cool, and the first few stars were just starting to pop out in the darkening sky. "What do you think you are doing?" Hannah demanded as soon as the door was closed behind them. "Coming into my home when I'm not here, taking my brothers off to butcher animals, teaching them skills they need," Ethan cut in, his voice calm. Skills their pa would have been teaching them if he had lived. Hannah's anger sputtered a little when he mentioned her father. He had been teaching Michael how to hunt and clean game before the influenza came and took him. "That is not the point," she said, but with less fire in her voice. "You cannot just force your way into our lives like this. The children hardly know you. They are getting to know me," Ethan said, "just like you are. Is that not what you would want? Before you consider my proposal." Hannah leaned back against the porch railing, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. "Mr. Blackett." "Ethan," he corrected her gently. "If we are going to be talking about a life together, we might as well use my Christian name." "Ethan?" Hannah gave in. "This is all happening way too fast. We do not know each other from Adam. You could be anybody, a drifter, a criminal." "I could be," he agreed. "But I am not. I have got references if you want them. I worked 3 years for the Bar T up in Wyoming, 2 for the rolling hills spread outside of Carson City. Before that, I served with the 7th Cavalry until '68. Hannah looked at him hard in the dim light. There was a sincerity in his expression that was hard to just brush off. "Why me?" she finally asked. "There are plenty of single women right here in Verde who would jump at the chance to marry a man with good prospects. Why pick a woman who comes with 4 children?" Ethan was quiet for such a long time that Hannah figured he was not going to answer at all. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, like he was looking back at something far away. "I lost my family back in '63. My pa, my ma, and 2 little sisters. A fever took them all while I was away fighting. I came home to a house that was empty and 4 fresh graves." He swallowed, and it was a hard sound. "I've been wandering ever since, just working, saving up. I thought what I wanted was land, cattle, something to build for myself. Now I am thinking that maybe what I really want is the thing I lost. A family. People who need me just as much as I need them." Hannah felt a lump rise up in her throat. His loss was a mirror of her own. That sudden empty space where your loved ones ought to be. "I'm sorry," she said, and it was all she could say. "That is a hard thing to carry." Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the darkening street. "I saw you that first day in town, guiding those children to church. All of you looked neat as a pin despite your troubles, heads held high. The way you carried yourself put me in mind of my ma. She had that same strength, that same pride." The door creaked open behind them, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. "Hannah," Sarah called, "the stew is getting cold, and James claims he is about to waste away from hunger." Hannah turned, putting on a smile. "We will be right in." When the door shut again, she turned back to Ethan. "I cannot give you an answer tonight." "I am not asking for one," he said. "I am just asking you to think on it, to let me show you the kind of man I am, and the kind of life we could build together." Hannah nodded her head slowly. "I will think on it, but I have my terms." Ethan's lips twitched into a smile. "I would expect nothing less, Miss Dawson. You do not come to the house when I am not here," she stated firmly. "You do not take the children anywhere unless I say so. And you must understand that any choice I make will be based on what is best for all 5 of us, not just for me." "Those are fair terms," Ethan agreed. "And I have one condition of my own." Hannah lifted an eyebrow. "Oh, you let me court you the right way, not just as a man who can provide for these children, but as a man who is interested in a woman." The warmth rushed back to Hannah's cheeks, and she was thankful for the dim light that hid her blush. "That is mighty forward of you." "Life is too short to be anything else," Ethan said simply. "So, do we have ourselves a deal?" Hannah paused for a moment, then held out her hand. "We have an agreement, a trial period, and nothing more." Ethan took her hand, his rough palm warm against her skin. Instead of shaking it, he brought it to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I am looking forward to it, Hannah." "Dawson," he said in a low voice, then let go of her hand and nodded toward the door. "Now let's not let that good stew go to waste." The rabbit stew was the finest meal Hannah had tasted in months. The children ate like they were starved, sopping up the thick gravy with the last of yesterday's bread, while Ethan kept them entertained with tales from his days on the cattle trail. Hannah found herself laughing in spite of her worries, pulled in by Ethan's easygoing nature and how he made sure every child felt like part of the conversation. As the evening went on, Hannah watched Ethan with her brothers and sisters. He listened with real interest to Sarah's serious talk about her school lessons. He patiently answered Michael's never-ending questions about horses and firearms. He let Lily show him her collection of shiny rocks and feathers, admiring each one like it was a precious jewel. And when James started to doze off right there at the table, Ethan gently lifted the boy into his arms and carried him to his bed without even being asked. By the time the dishes were all washed and the kitchen was put back in order, Hannah felt her defenses starting to crumble. It was not because of his handsome face or his strong arms, though those things surely did not hurt. It was because of the 100 little kindnesses he had shown, the decent way he treated every single member of her little family. "I reckon I should be heading out," Ethan said while Hannah dried the last plate. "It is an early start tomorrow. McGregor wants to show me the north pasture before he signs the deed." "So you are definitely buying his place?" Hannah asked. Ethan nodded. "The papers are all drawn up. I just need to do one last walkthrough, then it is all mine." He paused. "Would you and the children like to come see it? Maybe Sunday, after church?" Hannah thought about it. Seeing the property would make Ethan's proposal feel more real, both for her and for the children. Was she truly ready for that? "I would like that," she finally said. "The children would surely enjoy getting out." Ethan's smile was full of warmth. "I will bring the wagon around at noon, then." He reached for his hat, but stopped. "Hannah, I know all this is sudden and not exactly proper, but I meant every word about courting you the right way. Would you allow me to escort you to the harvest dance next Saturday? Just us two." Hannah blinked, completely surprised. She had not been to any kind of social gathering since her parents passed. She was too busy trying to survive to even think about such things. "I do not have a single thing that is suitable to wear," she said without thinking. "I am not asking to dance with your dress," Ethan answered with a grin. "Though I am sure you would look beautiful even in a sackcloth." The compliment, so unexpected and honest, brought another blush to her face. "I will think about it." Ethan nodded, looking happy enough with that answer. He set his hat on his head, gave her a tip of the brim, and then he was gone. The night just swallowed him up as Hannah stood there in the doorway, watching his tall shape vanish down the moonlit street. Sarah came and stood beside her, a knowing little look on her young face. "You like him," she said. It was not a question, but a fact. Hannah closed the door, trying to avoid her sister's sharp eyes. "He seems to be a kind man." "He is kind," Sarah insisted. "And he likes us, all of us. Even James, when he was being a pest about the rabbit's eyes." Hannah had to smile at that. James had been fascinated by the dead rabbit's glassy eyes, asking Ethan questions that would have tried the patience of a saint. "We hardly know the man, Sarah." Sarah's face was serious, much older than her 12 years. "We know enough. He is the first person since Ma and Pa died who has looked at us and seen a family instead of a burden." Those words hit Hannah with a surprising amount of force. Had that been what was happening? Had the townspeople, with all their sympathy and occasional help, started to see the Dawson children as her heavy load to bear instead of her beloved family? "No one thinks you are a burden," Hannah said with a firm voice. "You are my family, my responsibility." "But you do not have to do it all by yourself," Sarah said simply. "That is what Mr. Blackett is offering, is it not? A chance for you to share the load." "Out of the mouths of babes," Hannah thought with a shake of her head. "It is complicated, Sarah. Marriage is a very serious thing." Sarah yawned, suddenly looking like the little girl she still was. "Seems simple enough to me. He needs a family. We need some help. And he makes you smile, Hannah. I have not seen you smile that way since before." Before. It was such a small word for the line that divided their lives. Before their parents died and after, when the whole world changed. "Go on to bed, you wise little thing," Hannah said, kissing her sister's forehead. "We can talk more in the morning." As she banked the fire for the night and checked on the sleeping children, Hannah found herself looking at Ethan's proposal in a different light. Not as charity or as a bold move, but as a real offer of a partnership. A chance, just as Sarah had said, to share the load. The next few days flew by in a flurry of chores and whispers. News traveled fast in a small town that Ethan Blackett was buying the McGregor place and that he had set his sights on the Dawson girl. Hannah put up with the knowing glances and the not-so-clever questions with all the grace she could find. Mrs. Donovan, who was laid up in bed but still as sharp as a tack, brought it up during Hannah's Thursday morning visit. "So the handsome cowboy has come calling," she said as Hannah helped her sit up for her breakfast. "It is about time somebody saw your worth, girl." Hannah focused on fluffing the pillows behind the old woman's back. "It is not like that, Mrs. Donovan. Mr. Blackett is just being neighborly. That is all." Mrs. Donovan's laugh turned into a rattling cough that worried Hannah, but the old woman just waved her hand. "Neighborly? Is that what the young folks are calling it now? Girl, that man has been asking about you all over this town. Wanted to know if you were promised to someone. What kind of woman you are." Hannah nearly dropped the breakfast tray. "He has been asking about me?" "More like checking your references," Mrs. Donovan said with a satisfied look. "He is a smart man. Marriage is business, just as much as it is pleasure, especially out here." Hannah set the tray across the woman's lap, fighting to keep her face straight. "Mr. Blackett and I are not talking about marriage." Mrs. Donovan buttered her toast with shaky but stubborn fingers. "Not yet. But you mark my words, That man is looking to put down roots, and he has picked you and those little ones of yours." She took a bite and chewed on it for a moment. "You could do worse, Hannah. A whole lot worse." That evening, while Hannah was hanging laundry in the yard behind their little house, she caught herself looking down the road that led to the McGregor place. Ethan's place, if the town gossip was right. The thought of their visit on Sunday made her feel both nervous and excited, feelings she had not had in a very long time. "Hannah!" Michael's voice cut through her thoughts as he came running around the house, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mr. Blackett is coming, and he is leading the prettiest horse I have ever laid eyes on." And sure enough, the sound of hoofbeats came right after Michael's announcement. A moment later, Ethan came into view, leading a dappled gray mare that had a white streak down her face. The horse had a saddle on, but no rider, and Ethan himself was on foot instead of riding his usual bay horse. "Evening, Miss Dawson," he called out, touching the brim of his hat. "I thought you might like to meet Moondust." The rest of the children came pouring out of the house, drawn by the noise and the rare sight of such a beautiful animal in their yard. James immediately tried to touch the mare's nose, but Ethan gently caught his hand. "Always let a horse get your scent first, James," he said. "Like this." He showed him how, letting the boy hold out his flat hand for the mare to sniff before he patted her soft, velvety nose. "She is beautiful," Hannah said, walking up a little more slowly. She had ridden horses when she was a girl, but had not had many chances to see these days. "Is she yours?" A touch of pride showed on Ethan's face as he nodded. "I bought her from a fellow heading out to California. He needed the money more than he needed a good horse. She's as gentle as they come, but she can run like the wind if you ask her to." Michael was about to jump out of his skin with excitement. "Can I please ride her, Mr. Blackett?" Hannah was about to say no, but Ethan was already giving a nod. "That's exactly why I brought her over. I figured you young folks might like a little ride before supper time." He looked over at Hannah. "If your sister says it is all right, of course." 4 sets of hopeful eyes locked onto Hannah. She paused for a moment, then gave in. "Just around the yard, and only one of you at a time." What came next was an hour of pure delight for the children. Ethan lifted each one up onto the saddle, leading Moondust in slow, careful circles around the yard, while the others waited, fidgeting, with impatience for their turn. Even little Lily, who was usually nervous around big animals, was all smiles as Ethan taught her how to hold the reins. After all 4 had their ride, Ethan looked at Hannah with a question in his eyes. "Your turn." Hannah just shook her head. "I ought to get started on supper." "Just one trip around," Ethan insisted gently. "Show these little ones their big sister still remembers how to ride." A wave of pride and something else, a longing to feel like the carefree girl she used to be, made Hannah step forward. "Just once?" Ethan did not lead the horse for Hannah like he did with the children. He helped her get on, his hand strong and steady on her waist, as he lifted her right into the saddle. She could still feel his touch long after he had stepped away. "She responds to the slightest command," Ethan said, his voice holding a tone Hannah had never heard before. "Just let her know what you want." Hannah took hold of the reins, feeling the mare shift under her, ready and waiting. It had been far too long since she was last in a saddle, but the old feelings came rushing back. She nudged Moondust into a walk, then a slow trot around the edge of the yard. For a few short minutes, with the wind on her face and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, Hannah felt a freedom she had not known since she took on the duty of raising her siblings. She circled back to where Ethan was watching, a small smile on his face. "You ride well," he said, helping her down. His hands stayed on her waist a second longer than they had to. "Like you were born to do it." "Pa taught me when I was just a girl," Hannah said, suddenly realizing how close he was standing. "He always said every woman out west ought to know her way around a horse." "A wise man, your pa," Ethan answered. His blue eyes met hers, and for a moment that took her breath away. Hannah thought he might lean in and kiss her, right there in the yard with all the children looking on. But he stepped back. turning to the mare to fix the saddle. "I should get Moondust home before it gets dark. I have a new stall all ready for her at the ranch." "So it is official then?" Hannah asked. "You own the McGregor place now?" Ethan nodded, a big grin spreading across his face. "Signed the papers this morning. 20 acres, a solid house, and a good barn. Enough to build something real." "Congratulations," Hannah said, and she truly meant it. "That is a fine piece of land." "It will be even finer with the right folks to share it with," Ethan said, and his meaning was perfectly clear. "I still plan on bringing the family out on Sunday." "We will be ready right after church," Hannah promised. "It is all the children can talk about." Ethan's smile grew wider. "I am looking forward to it." He tipped his hat to her, then swung himself up onto his own bay horse. "Sleep well, Miss Dawson, children." As he rode off, leading Moondust alongside him, Hannah felt a strange mix of excitement and worry. Sunday's visit was going to make Ethan's offer feel much more serious, much more real. Was she truly ready to think about it? Sarah came up and stood beside her, a knowing look on her face. "He brought that horse for you," she said with total certainty. "Do not be silly," Hannah answered, guiding her back toward the house. "He brought it for all of us to have fun with." "Maybe," Sarah allowed, "but he was watching you the whole time you were riding. It was like he could not look at anything else." Hannah decided it was best to ignore that comment. But later, while she was fixing their simple supper of beans and cornbread, she found herself thinking about the feeling of Ethan's hands on her waist, and the way his eyes had stayed on her face. It had been such a long time since a man had looked at her like that. Not as a burden or a project, but as a woman. Sunday came up clear and cool, with the aspen trees down by the creek shining gold in the morning sun. Hannah took more time than usual getting dressed, choosing her best dress, a blue calico that made her eyes sparkle, and she twisted her hair up into a neat crown. The children were on their best behavior, scrubbed clean and excited about seeing a real ranch. The church service felt like it went on forever that morning. Hannah found her mind drifting from Reverend Thompson's sermon about patience. Her eyes kept going back to where Ethan was sitting a few rows up ahead. He had cleaned up mighty fine, swapping his usual work clothes for a dark coat and a string tie, with his hair combed back neat with water. A few times during the service, he glanced back over his shoulder, and their eyes met for just a second before he turned back around. Once the last hymn was sung and everyone was heading out, Ethan came right over to where Hannah was standing with her brothers and sisters on the church steps. "Miss Dawson," he said, holding his hat in his hand. "Children, are y'all ready for that tour?" His wagon was waiting, a heavy-duty farm wagon, instead of the smaller buckboard Hannah had pictured. In the back, a big picnic basket was tied down with rope, and fresh hay was spread out to make the ride comfortable. "A picnic?" Hannah asked, a little surprised. Ethan nodded as he helped Lily and James climb into the back of the wagon. "I thought we could enjoy our lunch down by the creek, if that sounds good to you. There is a nice shady spot under some cottonwood trees." The 3-mile ride out to the McGregor place, which was Ethan's place now, was full of the children's excited chatter and questions, and Ethan answered every single one with a patient smile. Hannah sat next to him on the wagon seat, very aware of how close he was, the width of his shoulders and the easy way his hands held the reins with a quiet confidence. She could smell the fresh scent of soap on him. The ranch, when they finally got there, was even more impressive than Hannah had imagined. The main house was a sturdy 2-story building made from local stone and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The barn and the other buildings looked well cared for, even if they needed a fresh coat of paint, and a clear stream flowed along the eastern edge of the property. "It is beautiful," Hannah said with sincerity as Ethan helped her down from the wagon. "It has got good bones," Ethan agreed. "It needs a little work, but all the important parts are solid." He showed them everything with a clear sense of pride. They saw the barn with its 6 stalls, though only 2 were being used by his horses. They saw the chicken coop just waiting for chickens, the vegetable garden that was cleared out for the winter, and at last, the house itself. Inside, the rooms were large and filled with light, though there was not much furniture besides the few things Mr. McGregor had left. A huge stone fireplace was the centerpiece of the front room, and the kitchen had a cast-iron cook stove that made Hannah's mouth water just looking at it. "There are 4 bedrooms upstairs," Ethan said, and she could hear a bit of nervousness in his voice as he watched for her reaction. "I figured the girls could share one, and the boys could have another. You would have your own room, and so would I, of course." The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them. The idea that all 6 of them could live here, together, as a family. Hannah felt her face grow warm as she pictured it. Waking up in this house, cooking meals in this kitchen, watching the children grow up with so much space to run and play. "It is a fine house," she said, choosing her words with care. "Any family would be lucky to live here." Ethan's eyes stayed on hers, looking for something more, but he did not push it. Instead, he led them back outside and down to the creek. They spread out blankets under the cottonwood trees and unpacked the picnic he had brought: fried chicken, potato salad, apple pie, and lemonade. It was a feast compared to what the Dawsons were used to, and the children dug in with great excitement. As they ate, Ethan told them about his plans for the ranch. He wanted to start with some cattle, and maybe add horses later on when he had more money saved up. He talked about planting a bigger garden in the spring, putting fruit trees along the south-facing slope, and maybe even getting some beehives if he could find someone who knew how to handle them. "My mother used to keep bees," Hannah heard herself say. "She taught me how to use the smoker and get the honey without getting stung too badly." Ethan's face lit up. "Did she now? That is another skill to add to your long list, Miss Dawson." The afternoon drifted by pleasantly. The children explored the banks of the creek under Sarah's watchful eye, while Hannah and Ethan sat there in the shifting shade. They talked about simple things like their favorite books, memories from when they were children, and their hopes for the future. Hannah found herself feeling completely at ease with him, drawn to his easy laugh and the thoughtful way he answered her questions. "Why vary?" she asked him at one point. "Out of all the places you could have gone, why did you decide to settle here?" Ethan thought for a moment, his eyes on the children as they tried to catch minnows in the shallow part of the water. "To be honest, I was not planning on it. I was on my way to California thinking I would try my hand at something new. I just stopped here to get some supplies and heard that McGregor was selling his place. I decided to take a look." He stopped talking for a second. "And then I saw you in town with your whole crew, and something just clicked. It felt like maybe this was where I was supposed to end up all along." The honesty in his voice made Hannah's heart beat a little faster. She had been ready for many things from Hannah Dawson was used to a man's charm, his smooth talk, even his sly ways. But this kind of straight-from-the-shoulder honesty from Ethan Blackett left her with nowhere to hide. "I am still turning this whole idea over in my mind," she said, feeling the need to be just as plain-spoken. "Getting married is a mighty big deal, especially with children to think about." "I know it is," Ethan answered. "And I know good and well that 4 weeks is not nearly enough time to be sure. But life does not always hand us perfect timing or the best of situations." He looked her square in the eye. "I like you, Hannah Dawson. I respect you. I reckon we could build a good life together for us and for those kids, but I will not crowd you. And I will not take it personally if you decide this is not what you want." Hannah watched him, trying to look past his handsome features and see the real man inside. What she found was reassuring, steady eyes, an honest face, and a plain openness that made you want to trust him. "The harvest dance?" she said all of a sudden. Ethan seemed a little lost. "What about it? I would like for you to take me." A small smile touched Hannah's lips when she saw his surprise. "That is, if you still want to." A grin broke across Ethan's face, slow and warm, like the sun coming up over the prairie. "The offer is most definitely still standing. I would be honored to take you, Miss Dawson." The next week was a whirlwind of getting ready. The harvest dance was the biggest social to-do of the year in Very, and Hannah had not been to a party like it since before her folks passed on. Her best blue calico dress would have to be good enough, though she spent one evening carefully letting out the seams where a year of hard work had made her shoulders a bit broader. Mrs. Donna Van, who was just tickled about the whole thing, insisted on loaning Hannah a pretty lace collar to spruce up the simple dress. And even Mrs. Hollister, who was usually stingy with her things, offered to let her borrow a black beaded purse that had been her own mother's. The evening of the dance, Sarah helped Hannah with her hair, twisting it up into a fine knot at the back of her neck, with a few soft curls left to frame her face. "You look so pretty," Sarah told her, as Hannah fastened Mrs. Donovan's collar, "just like Mama used to look when her and Papa would head out to a dance." Hannah smiled at her sister's reflection in the little mirror. "Thank you for keeping an eye on the others tonight. I will not be out too late." Sarah's face was serious. "You take all the time you need. We will be just fine." Michael promised he would behave, and Lily is already about to fall asleep. A firm knock on the door meant Ethan was here. Hannah took a slow breath, smoothed down her dress, and went to open it. Ethan stood on the porch holding his hat, wearing a clean white shirt, a string tie, and a dark vest. He had slicked his hair back neat and taken a razor to his face, showing off a strong jaw that was usually hiding under some scruff. In his other hand, he held a little bunch of wildflowers from late in the season. "Miss Dawson," he said, his voice as warm as his eyes as they took her in from head to toe, "you surely are a sight to behold." Hannah felt a warmth creep up her neck. "Thank you, Mr. Blackett. You clean up pretty good yourself." Ethan let out a rich, real laugh. "Well, that is high praise," he said, offering her the flowers. "These are for you. There is not much left blooming this time of year, but I thought you might like them." Hannah took the little bouquet, touched by how thoughtful he was. "They are lovely, thank you." After saying their goodbyes to the children and giving Michael a firm look about his chores, Hannah and Ethan started walking toward town. The night air was cool but not biting, with stars shining like diamonds in the clear sky. Ethan had brought his wagon instead of his horse, and he helped Hannah onto the seat with a careful hand. The town hall was already buzzing with folks when they got there, with lantern light glowing from the windows and the lively sound of a fiddle spilling right out into the street. Inside, the big room had been all fixed up with autumn touches, with bundles of dry corn stalks in the corners, pumpkins and squash on the refreshment tables, and paper chains in fall colors hanging from the rafters. For a second, Hannah felt a wave of panic as folks turned to look when they walked in. She had not been around this many people in so long, and here she was on the arm of the town's newest and most sought-after single man. "Just breathe," Ethan said quietly, his hand resting firm and warm on the small of her back. "We are just here to listen to the music and maybe have a dance if you feel up to it." His calm presence settled her nerves, and before long, Hannah was smiling and saying hello to neighbors she had not seen in a while. Mrs. Donovan, who was sitting in a chair by the wall with a quilt on her lap, gave her a big wink when Hannah came over to thank her for the collar. "That collar suits you, child," the old woman said, her sharp eyes noticing how Ethan stood close by Hannah's side. "And so does that man of yours." The music kicked up then, and a lively reel got couples to line up all down the hall. Ethan lifted an eyebrow to ask a question, and Hannah gave a nod, letting him guide her out to join the dance. It had been ages since Hannah had danced like this, but her feet remembered the steps as the fiddle played on. For a big man, Ethan was surprisingly light on his feet, and he led her through the moves with ease. When the song was over, Hannah's cheeks were flushed and she was laughing, feeling more free than she had in a very long time. "You have been keeping secrets, Mr. Blackett," she teased as they stepped away from the crowd. "Where on earth does a rancher learn to dance so well?" Ethan grinned and handed her a cup of punch from the table. "My mother made sure all of us kids learned how. She said it was a civilized skill that would do us good no matter what life threw at us." "She was right," Hannah said, taking a sip of the sweet punch. "Your mother sounds like a very smart woman." She was. Ethan's smile faded just a little. I think she would have liked you. You both have the same practical way of looking at life, that same kind of strength. The next song was a waltz, much slower and closer than the reel. Ethan held out his hand and Hannah took it, letting him lead her back out among the dancers. As they swayed to the gentle melody, with Ethan's hand resting on her waist and his eyes holding hers, Hannah felt a change between them. This was not just about a practical solution anymore, not about his loneliness or her troubles. There was something real growing between them, a little spark you just could not deny. "Your mind is working awful hard over there, Miss Dawson," Ethan said in a low voice as they spun in a slow circle. Hannah smiled up at him. "I am just weighing the possibilities. Come to any conclusions." His voice was light, but she could hear a little bit of worry underneath. "Not quite yet," she answered, "but I'm leaning one way more than the other." The pure relief and hope that washed over his face nearly made Hannah's heart stop. He pulled her just a tiny bit closer, still proper enough for all the watching eyes, but close enough to make her hold her breath. "I am a patient man," he said. "But I have to admit, waiting for your answer is putting me to the test." Hannah let out a soft laugh. "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Blackett. Reverend Thompson said so just this past Sunday." "That he did," Ethan agreed with a crooked smile. "Then again, I doubt the good Reverend has ever wanted something as bad as I want to hear you say yes." That honest confession sent a warmth all through Hannah's chest. When the song ended, she was almost sad to leave the circle of his arms. They danced a few more times as the night went on, but they also sat out some songs, chatting with neighbors and friends. Hannah noticed that Ethan made a point to talk with everyone, from the mayor all the way down to the boy who worked at the stables, and he treated every single one with the same decent, easygoing respect. It said a lot about the kind of man he was, she thought, that he was not one to put on airs or treat one person better than another. As the party started to wind close, Ethan went to get their coats and helped Hannah with hers. Outside, the air had turned crisp, with a bite that promised frost before sunrise, and the stars seemed to shine even brighter than before. "Would you mind if we took a short walk before I take you home?" Ethan asked as they stepped out of the hall. "It is such a beautiful night. It feels like a waste to let it end so soon." Hannah nodded that she would like that, and they walked toward the edge of town, where the houses stopped and the open land began. The sound of the party music faded away, and all you could hear were the chirping of crickets and the lonely call of an owl way off in the distance. They paused on a little bridge that went over the creek, leaning against the rail and looking down at the water, which looked like a silver ribbon in the moonlight. For a good long while, they just stood there together in a comfortable quiet. "I had a truly wonderful time tonight," Hannah finally said. "Thank you for inviting me." Ethan turned to look at her, his face serious in the moonlight. "Thank you for saying yes to the dance. And I hope," he said, pausing for a moment, "that it is not the last time I will hear you say yes to me." Hannah looked up at him, taking in the face that had started to mean so much to her in such a short while. The strong set of his jaw, the little scar over his right eye, the faint lines around his eyes from smiling. They were all familiar now, all part of this man she had grown to respect, and yes, to care for so deeply. "Ask me again," she whispered. Ethan's eyes went wide for a second, and then he understood. He took her hand in his, and his touch was warm right through her gloves. "Hannah Dawson," he said, his voice low and sure. "I am asking you to let me be a brother to your 4 siblings, to let me stand by you and help raise them right. I am asking you to be my wife, to come build a life with me at the ranch, to be my partner in everything that comes our way." He stopped. He cleared his throat. "I'm putting this out there because I've started to care for you more than I ever reckoned I could in this short a time, and I truly believe we can make a good life together." Hannah felt tears well up, not from sorrow, but from a feeling so big it nearly burst her heart. "You realize what you're getting into, don't you? 4 children, each one a world of their own. This won't be a cakewalk." "Nothing worth having ever is," Ethan answered, his voice steady. But we'll handle it, side by side. That's the whole point of getting hitched, isn't it? Two folks taking on whatever life throws at them, making each other stronger for it. Hannah took a deep, steadying breath, her mind made up. Then my answer is yes, Ethan Blackett. A yes to all of it. The pure, unfiltered joy that lit up his face was a sight Hannah knew she would cherish for all her days. Ethan brought her hand to his lips and gave her knuckles a heartfelt kiss. Then he just couldn't hold back any longer and pulled her into a strong embrace. "You have made me the most fortunate man in the whole Nevada Territory," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "I give you my word. You will never be sorry for this, Hannah. I'll spend the rest of my days proving it to you." Their first kiss was soft, a quiet promise made under a blanket of stars. When he let her go, Hannah felt a deep sense of peace, like she'd finally reached the end of a long and weary road. "The children are going to be so happy," she said, picturing how they had taken to Ethan so quickly. Ethan let out a warm laugh that echoed in the quiet night. "I sure hope so. I've become mighty attached to those little ones." His face softened. "They're a piece of you, Hannah. They're part of the reason I fell for you." Hearing him say the word so easily made Hannah's heart skip. "Love? Are you certain it's not too quick for talk like that?" Ethan just shook his head. "I've never been more certain about anything. I love you, Hannah Dawson. I think I have since the day I saw you stand up to that thief, looking as proud and fierce as a mama lion watching over her cubs." A teary laugh escaped Hannah as the emotions washed over her. "I love you too, Ethan. It scares me half to death how fast it happened, but it's the truth." He kissed her again, longer this time, his arms holding her securely. As they began the walk back to her house, Hannah felt like her feet weren't even touching the ground. The future, which had once looked like an endless struggle, now seemed wide open and full of light. News of their plan to marry spread through Verde like a prairie fire. By that Sunday morning, when Ethan took a seat with the Dawsons in church, the whole town was buzzing about it. Reverend Thompson even managed to slip a clever mention of new beginnings into his sermon, which made Hannah blush bright red while Ethan just grinned beside her. The children took the news just as Hannah had prayed they would. Sarah, ever the practical one, started writing down lists of things they would need for the move to the ranch. Michael let out a whoop of joy, excited about learning how to be a ranch hand from Ethan. Lily shyly wanted to know if she could plant flowers around their new home next spring, and little James just climbed right up into Ethan's lap. "Now you can be my daddy," he announced, "and I won't have to miss my old one so much." That simple sentence brought tears to both Hannah's and Ethan's eyes. Ethan hugged the small boy tight and promised he would try his very best to be the father he deserved. They decided on the first Saturday in December for the wedding, only 3 weeks from then. Mrs. Donovan declared it was happening at a scandalous pace, but Hannah calmly explained that with winter on its way, it just made good sense to get settled at the ranch before the deep snows arrived. "Good sense indeed," Mrs. Donovan said with a sniff, but there was a definite twinkle in her eye. "Just be sure all that good sense doesn't run the romance right out of you, girl." There wasn't much risk of that. Ethan was a truly dedicated fiancé, stopping by to see Hannah every day and often carrying little presents for her and the children. He brought a ribbon for Lily's hair, a new pocket knife for Michael, a little wooden horse he had carved for James, a book of poems for Sarah, and for Hannah, he brought wildflowers, a tortoiseshell comb, and one day, a bolt of beautiful blue wool fabric that was the exact color of her eyes. "For a new dress," he said when she insisted it was too much. "Can't let my bride get cold on our wedding day." Working side by side, Hannah and Sarah stitched the material into a lovely, simple dress with a snug top and a flowing skirt that Hannah knew Ethan would like. Mrs. Donovan gave her the very last of her fine Belgian lace to trim the collar and sleeves, and Mrs. Hollister did something amazing. She gathered a group of ladies from the town to form a sewing circle and help with all the finishing touches. I have never met a young woman more deserving of a little help. Mrs. Hollister stated when Hannah tried to express her gratitude. "You have raised those children on your own for long enough. It's high time this town offered some real help beyond the odd food basket." All the while, Ethan was hard at work getting the ranch house ready for his new family. He brought in men to patch the roof and fix some weak spots on the porch. He bought fresh linens and other needed furniture. And he even had a modern cook stove put in to take the place of the old one left behind by Mr. Gregor. "I want it to be perfect," he explained to Hannah on one of his visits. "I want all of you to feel like you're home from the very first minute." The day before the wedding, a thick layer of snow fell, covering Verdi in a blanket of white. Hannah gazed out the window of her little house, worried they might have to put things off. But when morning came, the sky was a brilliant clear blue. The whole world had become a sparkling, clean slate that felt like the perfect backdrop for a new life. Sarah helped Hannah get ready, her small fingers carefully doing up the tiny buttons down the back of the blue wool dress. "You look just like a queen," Sarah said with certainty once Hannah was all dressed, her hair styled in gentle waves and topped with a little crown of white rosebuds that Mrs. Peterson had somehow found at the general store, despite the cold season. Hannah looked at her own face in the little mirror and hardly knew the woman looking back. The constant crease of worry that had marked her brow for months was gone, replaced by a happy glow that no makeup could ever create. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, gently fixing the lace on Hannah's cuff. "Ethan's waiting for you." Hannah could only nod. A lump of emotion caught in her throat. She was ready. Not just for a wedding, but for the life that would come after it, for the partnership she and Ethan would create, and for the family they would raise together. The church was packed solid when they got there. It seemed the entire town had come to watch. Reverend Thompson stood at the altar with a wide, kind smile, and next to him was Ethan. He looked more handsome than she had ever seen him, dressed in a new black suit with his hair combed neat, and his eyes locked onto hers the moment she stepped inside the church. The children walked down the aisle ahead of her. Sarah was serious and composed, and Lily sprinkled dried petals from the flowers Mrs. Peterson had grown. Michael and James did their level best to act like grown men in their Sunday best, though James could not help but give Ethan a quick little wave as he went by. When Hannah finally stood beside him at the altar, Ethan took both her hands in his. His grip was steady and warm. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, so only she could hear. The service itself was straightforward but full of heart. They said their vows in clear voices, promising to love, honor, and be there for each other for the rest of their lives. When Reverend Thompson finally said they were husband and wife, Ethan kissed Hannah with a gentleness that made her eyes well up. "Mrs. Blackett," he murmured against her lips, and Hannah felt a jolt of excitement at the new name, the new beginning, the new life that was unfolding right in front of them. The party afterward at the town hall was a happy, noisy affair. Every family in Verdi had brought a dish to share, and the fiddler from the harvest dance played lively tunes. Hannah and Ethan made their way through the well-wishers, accepting hugs and kind words, but they always seemed to drift back toward one another like they were tied by an invisible string. Their happiness was so real you could almost reach out and touch it, and it seemed to make everyone else happy too. As the party started to quiet down, Ethan slipped out for a moment. He came back with the wagon, which was now loaded up with the few belongings Hannah and the children were taking with them. The townsfolk all came out onto the steps of the hall to wave them goodbye, calling out good wishes and tossing handfuls of grain for good luck, as Ethan helped his new family climb aboard. The ride out to the ranch was like something from a dream, with the snow-covered ground sparkling under the afternoon sun. The air was cold and fresh, and the children kept up an excited chatter from the back of the wagon. Hannah sat up front next to Ethan with his arm wrapped around her, keeping her warm against the bite of the cold. As they came over the last rise and the ranch house appeared below, Hannah's breath caught in her throat. A thin wisp of smoke was rising from the chimney, and a warm, welcoming light shone from every single window, like a lighthouse in the fading daylight. "Welcome home," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. He helped her down from the wagon, and Hannah just stood there, looking at the house that was now theirs, the place where their life would begin. A wave of thankfulness washed over her that was so powerful it almost made her knees weak. "Thank you," she said, turning to her husband, "for all of this." Ethan's smile was gentle, as he reached out and brushed a single snowflake from her cheek. "No, Hannah, thank you. For making my house a home, and for bringing these children into my life. He took a look at the 4 eager faces peeking out from the wagon, so grateful for making them a family. The kids all hopped down from the wagon, then took off running for the house, hollering with excitement. Hannah and Ethan walked up more slowly, holding hands, all set to start their new life as one. 5 years down the road, Hannah was standing on the porch of the Blackett Ranch house. She was watching Ethan teach their son, a 3-year-old named Thomas, how to sit a gentle pony down in the corral. The little boy's laughter floated on the summer breeze, a sound that just always made Hannah's heart feel full. So much had changed in those 5 years. The ranch was doing real well under Ethan's steady hand, growing from just a small homestead to one of the most successful spreads in the whole area. The house had gotten bigger too, with a whole new wing built on to make room for their growing family, and all the little upgrades Ethan insisted on for Hannah's comfort. Sarah, who was now 17, had blossomed into a beautiful young lady, and even had a job teaching at the Verdi School. Michael, at 15, was Ethan's right-hand man on the ranch, showing a real knack for the work that made his stepfather swell with pride. 13-year-old Lily had found she had a gift for drawing, and her pictures hung on the walls all through their home. And 10-year-old James, he'd gotten over being so shy and turned into a friendly boy with a sharp mind and a good heart. As for Hannah and Ethan, the marriage they'd rushed into had grown into a true partnership, one built on love, respect, and the dreams they shared. Every single promise Ethan had made, he had kept, and then some. He was a good husband to Hannah, and a caring father to all 5 children, never making a bit of difference between the 4 he took on and the one they had together. "Mama, look at me," Thomas shouted, sitting up straight in the saddle while Ethan led the pony around in a circle. "I see you, my brave little cowboy," Hannah called back to him with a wave. She put a hand on her own round belly and felt the baby inside give a strong kick, like it heard her voice. Just a few more weeks, and their family would be even bigger. Ethan looked up and his eyes met hers from across the yard. His smile was just as warm and real as it was the day she first met him. He said a word to Michael, who took the pony's rein, and then he walked over to the porch with his long strides. "How are my 2 girls doing?" he asked, putting his hand gently next to Hannah's on her belly. "Girls, huh?" Hannah raised an eyebrow. "You seem awfully sure it is a daughter this time." Ethan just grinned, pulling her into a hug as best he could with her belly between them. "Just a feeling. But a boy or a girl, it does not matter one bit, so long as the baby is healthy and has your eyes." Hannah let out a laugh, leaning into his arms. "You say that every time, and I mean it every single time." Ethan kissed her on the forehead, and then on her lips, holding it for a moment with a sweetness that could still make her heart pound after all this time. From the corral, you could hear excited shouts as Thomas made his first trip around all by himself on the pony, with Michael walking proudly right there beside him. From inside the house, the smell of Lily's apple pie drifted out the open windows, mixing with the sweet scent of Sarah's roses that grew along the walkway. Hannah closed her eyes, just taking in that perfect moment. Back when she was 19 with 4 brothers and sisters to feed, trying so hard to keep them all together after their folks passed, she never could have dreamed of the life she had now. A life just filled with love, built on a strong foundation, and blessed more than she could ever say. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Blackett?" Ethan whispered, his breath warm, against her hair. Hannah opened her eyes and looked right into his with a smile that showed him all the love in her heart. "Just thinking how thankful I am that a certain cowboy decided to ride into Verdi that day. How grateful I am that he saw a family that was struggling, and offered not just some help, but a place for us in his heart. Ethan's blue eyes got soft. The same blue that had caught her eye from the very start now held 5 years of shared memories. "Best choice I ever made," he said, plain and simple. "Loving you and loving these kids. It is the biggest joy of my entire life." As the sun started to dip behind the mountains, stretching long golden shadows across the land they had worked together, Hannah knew for certain that what had started as a practical deal between two strangers had grown into the truest, deepest love either of them could have ever hoped for. And she knew that as their family kept on growing, that love would only get stronger. It was a legacy worth more than any land or money they could ever leave their children. "Come on inside, husband," Hannah said, as she took Ethan's hand in hers. "Your family is waiting for you." And side by side they walked into the house that had truly become a home, and into the future they had built together with love, hard work, and a promise to always be there for each other and for the children who brought them together in the first place. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.